All right, friends, welcome to another episode of Healedish, and I am so excited about today's guest. I have Beth Granger here to tell us all about how she was born and raised in a cult.
Thank you. It's great to join you.
Coming on.
Thank you. I loved listening to your other guests, so I'm thrilled to be here.
Oh, your story is so powerful and historic, as people are going to see, but I was hoping you could give us just a quick overview of the cult that you were raised in, and then we can go back and talk about some of your earliest memories.
Sure. Well, I guess I'll give a few spoilers. Like, first of all, you said I'm a cult survivor. I actually was a cult baby. I was born, as you said, into the cult and raised there. And so I'm a cult survivor, and I was there for 30 years, by the way. And I'm also a representative plaintiff in a class action lawsuit against our abusers. And spoiler, we became the first historical abuse case to win a trial in Canada. So I'm really proud of that. That just wrapped up this year. I'm a diet culture dropout. We can get into that later because that had to do with the cult. I'm a recovering overachiever, which I think many of us are. And last but not least, I'm a newly published author, and my book is called Born and Razed, R-A-Z-E-D. Surviving the cult was only half the battle. So that's kind of why I'm here. But just to give a snapshot of, set the stage, I was the first baby born to staff members at an elite private boarding school called Grenville Christian College. And it was in Canada, and it advertised itself to be an Anglican institution. But in truth, it was a cult hiding in plain sight. We even duped the Anglicans because the Anglican Church and all the higher-ups from society who were members of our board of advisors had no idea what was really going on behind the glowing facade. What was really going on was when I was 3, our school was struggling financially, and kind of just across the board, the staff were struggling. And they found out, they were looking for advice and guidance from outside spiritual leaders. And our school actually fell prey to 2 women who were leading a community, a commune really, in Cape Cod. And these 2 women were called the Mothers. And under their influence, they became our spiritual leaders. And our school became an institution of paranoia, and that brainwashed and abused and terrorized its members for decades.
But so was it not really a cult beforehand? Was it really the sisters' influence that made it a cult?
Yeah, so it was, basically the school started out as one of a franchise. It was like an evangelical kind of ish franchise of private boarding schools that were trying to win the world for Christ. There was one in Dallas, one in New York City, one starting in Europe, and they were even looking in Africa. So this was the first Canadian one. But by the time I was 3, all of the schools were going bankrupt. They weren't doing well. So our branch reached out to try to find help from outside leaders. And these 2 women were well known to the leaders at our school. And they swooped in and just, I don't know, like when people are going through difficulty and like uncertainty and, feeling very vulnerable, like things are going to fall apart. That's the best time to be swooped in, like not swooped in. That's not a thing. To be caught up in a cult. And so these women from these 2 mothers from the Community of Jesus is what the cult is called in the Cape, and it's actually still in operation. They came up and they had all this prophecy, and they just took the staff who were fledgling and convince them that God had a very exciting call for the staff and for the school. And if everyone just submitted to his will and were obedient and gave, committed for life, you had to take vows of obedience for life,
Yeah.
made lifetime confessions, all the rest. They just came in and took over. And the staff were told either buy in or leave. So most of them had joined this school 3 years earlier, after they had sold everything and basically dedicated their lives. So it wasn't, my parents said they were in it, they believed that it was God's will for them to be there. So
How old were your parents at the time? So you said you were born into it. So they were staff members at the
Yeah.
school? Were they teachers?
yes. So, but I should just clarify that everyone who worked at the school, all the staff, even the maintenance, housekeeping, everyone, after the mothers got there, you couldn't work there. You couldn't even have a job there unless you took vows of obedience for life to the mothers. So my parents were my father was the high school principal when the mothers got there, and my mom was a French teacher. But they right away made all kinds of sweeping changes, and one of them was that my dad was throned. He said, I was a high school principal in the morning, and in the afternoon I was digging ditches, he said. So basically it was tough love to the extreme, and they were taught right away that their sin had to be rooted out, and that everyone's rebellion was why the school was struggling. And it was very difficult teaching, but the staff believed that these women had a vision, and it's just mind-boggling to me how quickly they took over. So just to fast forward, well, I suppose we'll get to it. Yeah. But yeah, I think that's at the stage.
I wanted to ask, what was the belief system? What denomination was it beforehand? Because you said that they came in and they had this prophecy that they thought that they had this idea or word from God that they were supposed to come in and bring change. Was that something that people were receptive to? Had they heard of prophecy before?
Yes, so they were primed. Most of the staff were sort of like evangelical, Holy Ghost.
Got it.
There were a lot of singing in tongues happened, which I remember distinctly. I love it how you talk on your podcast about that, because as a little one, I couldn't stand it when people broke out into tongues. I was terrified. And I was mostly terrified because I couldn't figure out if I was supposed to join in, and if so, how? It looked like they had all been taken over by aliens. I just hated it so much. So yeah, we had the tongues. We had I would say it was evangelical at its core. But what was interesting was when the mothers came, I don't know what possessed them to do this, but in their they basically became spiritual guidance for the school, and also they became directors on paper. So they were calling a lot of the shots, and one of their directives was that we should become an Anglican school, which in Canada, I think it's Episcopalian is what it is in the States, but it's Anglican schools are very well respected in Canada, and it's basically Church of England. So it's like that whole upper class sort of notion, and very very traditional. So if you're an Anglican school, and you'll attract a certain hierarchy of the population.
Well respected,
and it legitimized the school. So it completely made parents feel they could trust what was going on there. And the mothers had lots of connections, including one of their followers, or not followers, but one of their friends was the Anglican bishop in Canada, an Anglican bishop, and he pulled strings and had our two headmasters become Anglican priests. They got ordained very quickly
Wow.
without going through all the channels, the regular channels. So our school appeared on the outside to be Anglican. We worshipped in Anglican. All of a sudden, they were wearing robes. I remember when I was really little, and I'm like, what's going on? Because they'd be wearing they wore the robes, the Anglican robes, and we had Anglican prayer books, and we started singing from the Anglican hymn books, and it was all very unfamiliar because prior to that, it was all evangelical type services that would last like 3 hours.
How did they have the power to change that? Because you said that there were different locations around the world. So how did they have the power to just decide that they were going to change the denomination of the boarding school?
So the other ones had all gone bankrupt, and we changed from it was Berean Christian School. They changed their name. They changed the whole, so they became an independent.
Oh, so they weren't owned anymore by the other places. Oh, so they had free reign to do whatever they wanted to do at that point.
Exactly.
I had a question about the sisters. So how did they know each other? And what was their relationship to each other? Were they just best friends, or what was the situation there?
Well, it's funny because I never questioned. I never got curious about that. But after all the abuse has come forward and all the truth has come to light, we found out that they were lesbian lovers.
No way.
And they would preach that, homosexuality was worse than murder. And so that was something that even my parents just could not believe. But it's now their whole backstory is coming to light bit by bit. They're both dead now, but it's just amazing how they were basically two housewives who had the unique ability to start preaching, and they preached in a team situation, and they would do the kinds of things where they were very dynamic, very compelling when you listen to them, kind of spooky almost, like they made me scared. But and when I hear their voice, because we had to listen to their sermons on recordings all the time, it was part of our upbringing, and when I hear those recordings now, my whole body starts to shake. But there's an interesting backstory for them, and in fact, the cult and on the Cape, which is still going, there's a group called Rock Harbor Truth that's comprised of people who have survived the place and have left it, and they are putting out a podcast that's called Cult on the Cape. And I just heard the last 2 episodes. What were the backstories of these 2 women? So it was really cool to listen to. Just this week they came out.
I bet that's crazy because even though you've done so much healing, to learn more and more information and to listen to a podcast that is talking about something that directly affected your life for 30 years and on, but 30 years of you being in this, I imagine that would just be a lot to take in.
It is. It's really great. And we've all, because the cult is still going, and it's very financially, what should I say? It's very wealthy.
Yeah.
And people who have left have been so broken and so scared to speak out that when I was about to publish my book, about 2 years ago, the lawyer in charge of our lawsuit in Canada urged me not to publish because she was so afraid that I would be sued by the community, and that she urged me to make my story fiction and change all the names. And I was like, I can't do that. What would be the point? I had worked so hard to tell the story, but it's not just my story. I feel what I wrote was representing hundreds and hundreds of students who had gone through our school. And as a representative plaintiff, I had to have it there in truth without names changed. And so I did, consult a defamation lawyer, and I got my ducks in a row. But I guess the point I'm trying to make is now people are starting to, not just my book, but other books are coming out, and this podcast is coming out, and people are starting to get the courage to speak the truth. And also a very new lawsuit has been launched by a survivor who just left 2 years ago against that community. So it's all kind of coming up, like the truth is coming out, and it's really healing. So healing.
I bet very validating.
And validating.
To realize
absolutely.
that, yeah, the moments that you felt like something was wrong or that it didn't feel good to you in your body being there, it is finally being validated by everybody else who are saying that this was never okay.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you could take me back to, obviously we know that they came in, they started changing everything. They wanted to put on this facade of being well respected by changing the denomination. But when was the first time that maybe you or your parents started to realize that something was really off with how they were doing?
Gosh, well, okay, so I guess anyone who's grown up in these systems, high control religion, I don't know, maybe not everyone, but I think it's safe to say that many of us don't even realize there's anything wrong with it until we're out.
Yeah.
Like for me, my parents were in it till the day it went bankrupt, so they didn't see anything wrong necessarily. And for me, I left at 31 because I was so deeply unhappy that I couldn't even imagine doing, like, I couldn't keep up with my vows anymore. Do you know what I mean? It was like leaving an unhappy marriage. I didn't think there was anything wrong with the place. I thought I was the failure. And I felt like I was the black sheep in a white flock. And the truth of it being a cult did not occur to me until the school went bankrupt 6 years after I'd left. And then allegations of abuse just exploded online in the media and on this website called FactNet that was for survivors of cults to post anonymously. And I got on that. I heard about it and I got on there, and people were posting like hundreds and hundreds of posts about Grenville. And that's when I started to realize it was a cult. And that's when I realized, oh my gosh, like people were terribly harmed there. And so for me, like, just to backtrack, I don't want to, like, we've hardly got into what it was like there, but I just tell that because in my case, I didn't realize it was problematic. In fact, when I got out and then I eventually met my husband, he was from the outside and he was a police officer in a nearby city. And he was mentioning just to some of his colleagues that he was dating a woman who had lived there. And they were like, oh, Grenville? That's a cult. And so he asked me, why are people telling me you lived in a cult? And I'm like, oh, it's just, they're bitter. Like, this is, exaggeration. I didn't see it. But that's because I was so indoctrinated and I normalized it. And also, I was needing a ton of therapy by the time the school closed. And I didn't realize why I needed therapy. I just was falling apart in other ways, like my eating disorder and stuff. So, yeah, we're getting like,
Yeah, I thought that you might say that there was something wrong with, I thought that maybe it would be earlier. So sorry, I didn't mean to take you to the end.
I didn't.
But I did know, and I was hoping that you could talk about how you were taken away from your parents at a young age and that they told your parents that it was a sin to love you. Isn't that what they said to them?
Yep. So these mothers, they had all the tricks that cult leaders, like the bag of tricks, the coercive control, manipulation, and part of that their tactics was to dismantle families. And they told our parents that they were blind to their children's sin, and that they had the sin of idolatry, and it had to be rooted out. And so, in order for them to be the Christians that they needed to be, they couldn't raise their children, because they needed to only love God. And
So their
and
kids
until
were their idols.
exactly. So what I came to learn was that it was a sin to love me. And I was, by the age 4, I was moved from family to family to family. And my parents were constantly being publicly shamed for their sin of idolatry and for being too soft on us. And that they were not, they were the worst people in the world to raise their children. And it was so damaging. Yeah, and the other thing, that another coercive tactic that was part of our life was that we had public humiliation sessions. I know a lot of cults have different names for them. In our case, they were called light sessions, where a sin was to be brought into the light, and people were publicly attacked for their sins, real or imagined, and you never knew if you'd be next. And we lived in constant fear. So I, from very young age, I remember my parents being publicly shamed. But then it wasn't long before I was
Yeah.
in light sessions, and I was the target. I remember them clearly by the age of about 6 and 7.
Oh my gosh. Well, I wanted to ask about your parents. Do you think that at that point, did they just fully buy into what the sisters were saying? Or was there any part of them that felt like, no, this is my kid, or at that point were they just so ingrained in this culture that they accepted what the sisters were saying?
I think they must have bought in, because otherwise, like, how could you stand it?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, and how could you not only stand having your children being raised by others, but then being publicly humiliated time and time again for your in for your idolatry and your unwillingness to get on board. One of the things my parents did, like, they actually were kind of rebellious in one way, and that is in these attack therapy sessions, light sessions for us, you were expected to attack others. So some of the sessions were planned, like they had weekly group sessions where smaller groups of staff would get together, and they were meant to attack each other, basically, I've noticed this about you and blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah. And my parents refused to do that. They were constantly being attacked, but they wouldn't call other people out. And so as a result, they weren't trusted to raise us. Do you know what I mean? And I think that was one of the big consequences of them doing that. And not all the kids were taken away from parents too. So some of the most strict parents, the ones who were really bought in, and the ones who were kind of the cruelest in light sessions, would get to keep their kids for most of the time. So those were the people I was living with.
So you were sent to go live with some of the stricter
Yeah.
parents?
Yes.
Okay.
The
Because that was
one.
going to be my question is, do you remember being taken away or being told, okay, now you're going to go live with so-and-so? And what was that like as you were just shifting around and falling asleep in other
Yeah.
people's houses?
It was terrible. I remember the tears. I remember the confusion, the not being able to, not even. I wasn't even allowed to say hi to my parents, and I'd see them in the hallways. I knew that I couldn't ask them for my needs, and I wanted so desperately for their attention. So, and it also was really difficult whenever I was put with other girls my age who got to live with their parents, because I couldn't understand it. So, yeah, I mean, but I wasn't alone. Like there were, I would say, of all the staff kids, at least half of us were not living with our parents. So, and we'd be moved constantly. So,
Well, it's a
yeah,
very
I
manipulative
remember.
way to try to get all of the parents to just do whatever the sisters are saying, because it's almost trickier, because if they had just taken all the kids away, then maybe the parents would have thought something's not right here.
Yeah.
But if you're seeing that only some of the kids are getting taken away, well,
Mhm.
you're thinking, well, they get to keep their kid. I guess they don't struggle with this, or they're parenting
Yeah.
the right way. They're doing the right thing. So if I just try harder, if I just buy into this more,
Yeah.
then maybe I could be like them, you know,
Yeah.
but it's all
And
based off of them saying that loving their child is idolatry,
yeah,
which
they preach that sin, all human love is sin before God.
how could they even think that? I know, I mean, there's no logic in it and we're never going to understand,
No,
but it's like, how could you read the Bible or claim any sort of faith and think that human love is a sin?
I know. It was just all about God is first, and yeah, I mean, like I've learned since. So when I was 8, my mom got pregnant, and with her fourth child, and it was a little boy, Robbie, was born, and I learned that she was publicly shamed repeatedly as a pregnant woman for getting pregnant because they said you have no business having another baby when you're not even able to parent your other three. And so then she was under immense pressure, and to the point, and it's in the book, but what really devastated me was they sent her away with my baby brother several times to the community of Jesus to basically be further indoctrinated. So he was gone for almost the first 3 years of his life in at Cape Cod, and I was even more abandoned up here in Canada. So it was just like families were just destroyed, and they were completely irrelevant. The family ties, and also we had to completely cut off with our outside family. So my grandparents and my aunts and uncles, we were not supposed to. We visited them, like I can count on one hand how many times we visited them, and that was so special to me. But we were not. They were in a typical cult. You have to break ties with the outside world,
Yeah.
and that's included. So.
Do you think that those outside family members and friends knew that this was a cult?
I've often wondered. I think one. So, in my in the story, I talk about my grandfather who lived in Ohio, and just before he died, he sent me a letter inviting me to come down to it was Springfield, Ohio, and do my whole college. Like he would pay for my whole 4 years of college or university. I guess it was Wittenberg University, and that he'd put me up in their house. And I was told that was the voice of Satan, and I had to say no. But I think he knew by then that there was something wrong. And then when he died, he left all his money equally amongst his grandchildren as with my mom. So I think his money became my ticket to freedom. It took me about
Wow.
6 years to figure it out because it was sitting in the bank and I didn't even have the guts to use
My
it.
gosh, what a gift.
Yeah. So,
Wow.
but as far as my other relatives, I've got some really beautiful aunts and uncles in Canada who I don't think ever really realized what was going on, and I hoped my book would help them understand what we had been through. But they're very evangelical, and once they read the book, they were not happy with the ending. Because basically it's clear that I didn't turn back to God for my healing. And
Yeah.
they were like, why didn't you go back to God? That's all you need to do. And, so I guess I'm
See, I
going to,
relate to that so much because
yeah,
I don't share what I believe on social media, but I get that all the time is like at the end of every here's the horrible thing that happened, the con man, and being a part of Bethel. And it's like, okay, but you didn't leave, right?
Right.
You didn't
You're
leave,
still a
right?
Christian.
Yeah. And it's like, it's almost like they don't want to validate your story unless they get the ending that they
Yeah.
deem,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, redemptive in their
Yeah.
mind,
Yeah.
So they're like, well, if it led you away from God, then I don't really want to know about it.
Exactly.
Which is
how
like,
they-
okay, but these are the sorts of systems that, isolate people. And also, it just perpetuates abuse if people are not willing to listen to these stories.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Let's just be shiny, happy people, and we'll.
Yes,
Oh,
exactly.
there's stories that happen, but you're fine now.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I'm sorry. I've definitely encountered that for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, can we go back to talk about more about the light
Sure.
sessions? So
Sure.
you said that your parents were being really attacked in these for loving you guys. And I'm wondering, you said that, how old were you? 6 or 7 when you started experiencing these light sessions? So what could they possibly be coming at you with at
Well,
that age?
I mean, it was very clear that everything about the whole thing where we're born a sinner and we're born evil.
Yes,
That was
babies cry because it's Satan inside of them.
exactly. So I saw mothers like my mom but other mothers being berated because their babies were crying, and stand against them, put the baby all by itself or whatever. But so there was an unending supply of sins that they could choose from, right? But no, I remember living with a woman who would require me to make confessions on a regular basis. And there's something off with you, Beth. I want you to think about what your sins are, and I'll be expecting them by bedtime. Or she'd see me in the hallway and have a private light sessions. Basically, you could have a light session with just a few people, and I got used to those by the time very early. And those terrified me because I'd be standing there trying to come up with my sins, and I had to think of something. That was another
Or
thing.
else you're probably prideful, and that's
yeah.
your sin.
So we were, you had to confess on demand. Confessions were a huge part of our life, and so were written confessions. The staff had to write their confessions every week or two to the leaders, and the leaders were both in Canada, but also the mothers in the States. So you had to write two sets, and I was a staff there for 10 years. So I know all about those confession letters. But just to backtrack, those confessions were always used against you. So they were never private. And I often wondered, how do they know about what I confess? You know what I mean? Because it would trickle down through the spy network.
Yep.
But I remember very clearly when I was 7, just to answer your question about light sessions, one time, like purity culture was a huge thing. They were always preaching about lust. I didn't know, what is this word? Like, what are they talking about?
Sounds bad.
Yeah, it sounds terrible. I mean, I remember when there was the mothers they would come up for retreats, and often we would, even the little ones, we would be there listening to them preach. And one retreat was all about lust, and it just sounded so scary and so awful, but I didn't know what they were talking about. But so I get into it in the book, but I basically was on a camping trip with another family, and I got up early in the morning with their 5-year-old daughter, and we decided to go for a walk down the road, and we saw this man mowing his lawn, and his back was to us, but he didn't have any clothes on. And we're like, what? And,
Yeah.
like, what is this? And we were, gobsmacked and looked at each other and, ran away. And, and we're so like horrified. We only saw him from the back, but we'd agreed not to tell anyone. Anyway, about several days later, I was pulled into a light session where I was reamed out for my lustful thoughts, and I must have had, like, been fantasizing about this man, and do I fantasize about everyone else and what they're wearing, what they look like under their clothes, and
Did they
all this.
hear about it from the other girl?
They did, and then I was in
Okay.
trouble. Then I
See,
was in
this
trouble
is
for
what
being
happens.
deceitful,
Yeah, when
because,
you
like,
build a culture of
yeah,
confessions.
exactly. So, how can you be so deceitful? We can't trust you around our little ones. Like, so from there on, I was 7, and I felt like so dirty, so evil. And, and it just went from there. Another thing that I often got light sessioned about was my gluttony. I was put on a diet at age 5, which has affected my entire life, because I've been, you know, from anorexia to bulimia to binge eating and everything in between. And just so hard to get that under control, because the more you try to control it, the worse it gets.
Yeah.
And the more, absolutely, like, I remember at age 5 thinking, if I lose weight, maybe they'll let me live with my parents. And I mean, that didn't work, but I tried. And yeah. So yeah, I'm 55 now, and I'm only now, after a ton of help, I'm only now more comfortable in my skin and able to eat without a ton of difficulty. So yeah, it's been a huge battle to find healing in that regard. So yeah,
It's
that,
horrific.
yeah,
The idea of putting a 5-year-old on a diet when you're growing, you actively need to be growing. I mean, it's so sick. It infuriates me
yeah. And
so much.
the mind games were insane. Like, when I
Yeah.
was 14, I was starting to become anorexic, and I was at one of the retreats with the mothers, who were fat, by the way. And of course, we were in so much, we revered them so much that I never thought about the fact that they were fat. Like, I didn't,
Yeah.
like, that. I was scared of them. They were so, in so much power over us. And I remember them, they would hand out disciplines all the time to deal with our sins. That was another part of our lives, was very harsh disciplines. But in this one case, they were talking to my mother and I. We were standing up amongst 200 strangers, and they were basically doing a light session on us. And they determined that all we cared about was being right. So as a result, my mother was, and they said to my mother that all she cared about was being right and looking good. So they wanted her to go home and gain 20 pounds as soon as possible. And I'm standing there thinking, what the fuck? No, I didn't think that, because I didn't say it. But like,
Yeah.
what do you mean? I have been on like, I've been made to be
It's
ashamed
about
of my
control.
body until now. And it's been over 10 years of me trying to lose weight, and you're telling my mom to gain weight. And so I internalized that as, well, then I must be even fatter than I thought. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, so
Yeah.
that just pushed me even into more anorexia. And I guess the point of that is, it was always so unpredictable. We had no idea what we'd be in trouble for next, and what our next discipline would be. And they got very creative with disciplining. So yeah.
Well, it's like whatever you were doing, it was wrong. It had nothing to do with the idea of like anybody actually needing to gain or lose weight. It was the idea of breaking you down and having control over that aspect. And do you remember what exactly they said when they put you on a diet? They just said, we see that you're struggling with gluttony at the age of 5.
Yeah. Well, okay. So what they did was, we had 2 headmasters. Well, one was headmaster, one was like director, the 2 men, and they became the priests at our school. And they were basically put in charge to be the mother's sort of spokespeople. So they directly were in contact with the mothers all the time to get direction. And their wives were just as high up. So all the rest of the staff, we had to call aunt and uncle. But the two leaders were Father Haig and Father Farnsworth, and their wives were not aunt, they were Mrs. So like they were special. So it was one of the women, it was Mrs. Haig who put me on a diet. And she just made it very clear that, you know, she was disgusted by my appetite and my gluttony. I was, if I look at pictures, I was maybe slightly pudgy, I guess. I mean,
My gosh,
very
who even
normal.
cares?
I
I mean,
know.
it's so fun. Like, it's funny in my family. You know, we're Hispanic, and I don't know if that has anything to do with it, but basically, all of us around the age of like 9 or 10, we all were a little pudgy, you know? Like, I mean, it's just like our genetics. I mean, genetics are genetics, and
Yeah.
we're growing. Like,
I
it's
know, you're
not
supposed to gain
about,
weight at that age.
yeah, the
But
idea
yeah,
of telling a child who weighs like, I don't know, 50 pounds or something that they
yeah,
need to lose weight is insanity.
yeah. But it went like it, I translated it to be a fear of my body, a fear of gaining weight, a fear of my curves. So purity, the whole purity culture in our case, you know, and I think this happens in many churches, is women are to be afraid of their curves, and puberty is a very scary event if you have curves, and I did. So yeah, I was determined to lose like my hips and my bust and everything else if I could. Yeah.
What were you taught about purity culture? Obviously, you got in trouble for quote unquote lusting at the
Yeah.
age of 7, which that story's insane. But did they ever have any sit down meetings specifically just about purity?
Absolutely. So the whole notion that women and girls, we were responsible for the thoughts, the dirty thoughts that men had. So, you know, we were shamed for our bodies and told that we were responsible for making sure that boys didn't lust after our demon flesh, basically. Girls were publicly accused of being whores, Jezebels, bitches in heat. And these are students from the outside world whose parents are paying $20,000 to have them come to a school that they think is Anglican. And they're being told in front of the whole school, you know, in front, sometimes in the case, we would have light sessions with all the students, and a girl would, like, one of my representative plaintiffs, there were 5 of us, and the only other one that was a girl, she was 12 and she was caught smoking, and they had her stand up to be reprimanded for that, and they called her a whore. Like, for smoking. Like, the streets of Toronto are lined with whores just like you, they yelled at her. And
Gosh.
we were taught that if we were raped or assaulted, it would be our fault. And then our clothing was so strictly controlled. And, you know, I hear this, actually, it really worries me what I hear going on even now in big churches and even Christian schools. You know, I thought ours was weird and unique, but no, it keeps happening. Like, it's like the modesty mandates are just wackadoodle, and so draconian. I mean, we had to wear bathing suits, like a regular one piece, but on top of that, we had to wear shorts and a tank top with wide straps on top of the bathing suits. That was the kind of, you know, and the guys had to wear shirts when they were swimming. And, but you
Hey,
know,
well, at
like,
least it's equal opportunity when it comes
yeah,
to
exactly. But I thought it was really interesting. Like, oh, and the other thing was like the sexualized confession. Like, okay, I don't know if that's the word. When we got to the trial, so like I mentioned, our lawsuit went to trial, and we had an expert witness who was amazing, and she was she was a psychologist, and so she was talking about the kinds of psychological damage that can impact people from these kinds of institutions and these kinds of programs. And one of the things she talked about was sexualized abuse, and she said it is a phenomenon that causes deep emotional trauma. And so she just listed off some of the examples that she'd heard from our statements. And it was so validating to know that things like when we were required to make sexual confessions and we were berated for inciting lust, or vilified for homosexuality, or when they use derogatory terms like whores and sluts,
To
temptresses.
children.
Yeah. And then just the whole preoccupation with sexuality and sin. She said this is this is documented traumatic abuse. And I felt like that was so helpful to hear. And she said, like in one case, I was in a late session once because my bathing suit that I wore under the shorts and the tank top wasn't supportive enough because I had a big chest. So already that was mortifying to me. I had borrowed someone else's bathing suit because prior to that we could only wear skirt bathing suits.
Oh, I forgot about those.
Yeah. But the skirt bathing suits were too immodest. So then we had to move to the next level. Anyway, I'd borrowed someone's bathing suit and it hadn't been supportive enough. And I was called into a light session and I'm like, what did they see? Like, so then they made me go and buy a very supportive bathing suit. And it was a whole ordeal to find one. And then I got home and I was called into a light session a few days later. They'd found my bathing suit that I'd bought hanging in my locked closet. So they're searching our locked closets. And I come into the light session and they're holding this bathing suit on its hanger. And I'm thinking, oh, what now? And they were upset because it looked like it was high cut. You won't even see it because it's going to be under the shorts and the tank top.
Oh, you mean like up on your thighs, like it came up too high.
Yes. So
okay, but you're wearing shorts on top of it.
So previous to that, I had never worn a bathing suit, like a regular bathing suit, ever in my whole life because we always wore skirt ones. They told me to go put this bathing suit on and come back to the light session where there were 5 women. And then they had me stand there and bend over with my back to them to see if it rode up. And then they had me turn around and bend over to see if they could see my cleavage. I mean, I totally normalized that, but years later, I cried and cried and cried thinking about it. And yeah, like I bring this up because the doctor who testified said that was so abusive. And I was like, oh my God, it was? Like, thank you.
No, it is, yeah.
And just even vilifying and humiliating students for having romantic feelings to each other. That was a huge thing. I was expelled for, they found out I had a crush on someone when I was 16. And it's a whole thing in the book, but I was expelled and sent to the Community of Jesus indefinitely without the ability to continue education until I had completely changed, basically indoctrinated to the point where I was a shell of my former self. And then I was able to return when I was almost 18.
And not even for being in a relationship, just for having a crush?
Well, when I say crush, they found the proof that we liked each other. But we were too afraid to talk. Like I didn't know he liked me. And we would look at each other with the eyes and stuff. And we would banter if we could in groups. But what happened was I didn't know if he really liked me. And I was just dying to know if he did. And he gave me a gold ring right before Christmas, before he was a boarding student. And it was a gold ring with a heart on it. And I hid it and was too afraid to wear it. But I was delighted because obviously he liked me. But that was the only, evidence. And then I made the mistake of sharing the ring and telling about the ring to a fellow staff girl. And she was like, "You're not wearing that, are you?" And I'm like, "No." I said, "Look, I'm hiding it under my mattress." Anyway, I was brought into a light session soon after, and they had the ring.
Because she turned you in.
Yeah. And that was the thing. We were expected to turn each other in about everything. And I was an idiot to tell her, but I knew she had a crush on someone else. So I thought I could trust her.
Yeah.
So.
Well, it's like, it's not even like you did anything wrong, you know? Just
We had never even
potential mutual
held
feelings.
hands. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, yeah. Anyway, it was purity culture was a huge thing, and it did a lot of damage with the students who were there.
Were there, so there were boys and girls
Yeah.
at this. So yeah, you brought up that there are people from the, like, there are kids from the outside world that are paying, how much are their parents paying potentially to send
At
them?
least 20,000 a year.
Oh my gosh. Like, I don't know. In my mind, I was thinking, oh, this is a small community and it's the staff and the kids. But
Yeah.
the fact that there are outside kids who are being sent here
Yeah.
thinking that this is a well respected place, do you think that any of those kids went home to their parents over the summer and said, hey, like, we were called whores, or anything like that?
It, people keep saying, how could this possibly have gone unchecked? How could students not have told their parents? But they did. Many students would go home. It's kind of like the troubled teen industry now. You hear from students who they tell their parents, but the parents either don't believe it because they've been told, don't believe your kids, they're going to manipulate you. Or the parents would contact the school and say, what's this I'm hearing? And the school would lie. And we've heard this from one brave administrator who came to the trial and spoke on our behalf. And she was right up at the top of the administration. And she said, yeah, we would lie to parents. And also, if a student did complain, they would not be safe. They would be targeted with even more attacks on them. And students who came under target had a lot of harm. I know some students who were there for just a few months who were expelled for this or that and are in their 50s and 60s now, still shattered from the experience. So, and the other thing is, nobody understood. People didn't know, oh, I'm in a cult. Like, they just thought they believed, a lot of them believed all the terrible things that they were being told about themselves, and they felt embarrassed, and they didn't want to tell their parents that, that they were rebellious and evil and all the things they were being told by the administration and the staff. And so, yeah, I think it was this case of kids were not believed. And that's why I thought it was so important to join the lawsuit, because I was the only representative plaintiff who had been a staff kid. And I knew that they were telling the truth, and I could speak to that. And I felt so much responsibility to contribute whatever I could to help the truth come out, because people, like, I still have, my book came out this year, and I still have hear from lots of former students who can't even read it because it's so triggering, even though I wrote it very much with them in mind, because I think it's very healing. I know a lot of them have said it's really healing to read it. But yeah, I don't know, I'm going off course now, but
No, I mean, it's unthinkable what really went below the radar, but you hear about that a lot. And like you said, in the troubled teen industry, I was listening to this last season of Something Was Wrong. I love that podcast. And they did an entire season on the troubled teen industry. And that is the tactic that they use, where they'll say, your kids are going to lie to you. They're so manipulative. That's why you're sending them here in the first place. They're super broken. So whatever they say, they're going to say anything to come home, because they don't want to take responsibility for their actions. So these parents are very much groomed or primed to think, okay, well, my kid is probably being dramatic. And then you have these kids who have so much shame about what they're being accused of that they don't want to say, hey, mom, I'm being told I'm a whore. Because, like, what if my mom thinks I am a whore? Or, like, what if she tells me I'm doing something wrong? So it's just a cycle of shame.
It is. It's so awful. And the disciplines that they would, not only were they dropped in to this cult, and there were 100 staff members there, like at the height of the place. So, you'd have maybe 300 teenage students and 100 staff. So, like, there were eyes everywhere. Do you know what I mean? Like a spy
Yeah.
network galore. And so they're just trying to survive. But, they would get in trouble for things that, like I said, sins real or imagined. Like sometimes students were getting in trouble for sinning in their minds, and terrible disciplines that were just, designed to break their spirits.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the disciplines. What are some
Yeah.
examples of that?
Well, anything from being paddled with a very big, like almost a canoe paddle, so severe that the welts and the bruising lasted for like 2 weeks in some cases. In one guy's case, it was still there 2 weeks later when he finally he ran away and didn't see his parents for 2 weeks, and they saw the state of his legs and body, and they agreed he didn't have to go back. But so the paddle, and you could be paddled for not turning someone in, or for having a bad attitude. That was the other thing. If they declared you having a bad attitude, how do you fix that? That happened to me a few times, and it's terrifying because they've decided that's what's wrong with you, and I thought I had a good attitude. So but yeah, some of the other the other thing was being put on D, we called it, or on discipline, and that's when you had to take off we all wore uniforms with the plaids, kilts, and the boys wore the ties, and they were very strict in the uniform department, and so you had to take your uniform off and right away put on street clothes, so people knew that you were in trouble, and you kind of had a spotlight on you. You couldn't speak; you were on silence. And when you're put on discipline, it was almost always indefinitely, so you never knew how long. And what you did was basically extreme, harsh labor, from dawn till bedtime, usually in the kitchen or some of the other places in the school where you're doing the dirty work, the worst jobs, and you just felt so ashamed. And yeah, it was really awful, like, because you couldn't speak to people, and you couldn't go to class or do your work, your schoolwork. So, I once the time that I was expelled, I was put on D first, and I didn't know for how long, and I ended up being on D for 29 days. And I'll never forget the number because it was so awful, and I thought, I'm never going to get off D, and then they shipped me off to the States. But
You couldn't people didn't talk to you for 29 days?
no,
That is
and
so
even during
abusive.
meals. Yeah, even during meals, you couldn't talk. And then they would keep light sessioning you the whole time. We know you have more to confess, just barraging you. So you're trying to come up with more sins the whole time so that you can appear to be changed. It's just so demoralizing. Yeah, so the being on D and paddling were the two worst. But then there were all these other ones where they would come up with these cruel disciplines that were usually out of left field, and they were worse for our staff kids. So we knew things like, if they thought we were sinning, we could be pulled out of any of the things that mattered to us. Like, I was really musical, so I wanted so badly to star in the musicals, and I was also in the orchestra, and so they'd pull you out of whatever you were good at. Or for me, one of my disciplines was I wasn't allowed to see my grades after grade 9 because it mattered to me how I did in school. And they thought that was just a way to deny my ego and annihilate my haughtiness. I was always told I was haughty. So I didn't see my grades all through high school. And both my brothers one was a valedictorian, one was a salutatorian. So it mattered to me. I wanted to do well. And, but there were so many other ways you could be disciplined. It was just really demoralizing. Another one I'll mention was as a young adult, it actually got worse. I actually was more abused as a young adult. And at one point, we had to write confessions all the time, like I mentioned before. So I was always confessing my sin. And at that point, I was quite bulimic. And I confessed to having eaten a box of chocolates and throwing it up just before a retreat where the mothers were coming up from Cape Cod, because I was so nervous, as we all would be. And I was fired as a result. So I wasn't, I had to be moved from the jobs I had and basically hidden away. And I worked as a maid with no pay indefinitely again until I'd changed, and they put me on all kinds of disciplines, and because of bulimia. So it was just, and I won't even get into boot camp. You got to read about that.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Boot camp was awful.
Like, we know that these things happen. We know that cults exist and somehow they get their grip of power, but hearing these stories of them just treating you so horrible for battling bulimia, and they're punishing you for that. I just keep thinking, how are there and this is me I'm being harsh because I'm mad. Okay. But, how are there so many evil people in one place who are willing to be so complicit? Like these are horrific,
I know.
actions from these adults.
It's a really good question. And in writing the book, it was really important for me to write it from the perspective of someone who'd lived there and been indoctrinated and been a staff. So I knew that, like you say, there's evil, but also these staff were all indoctrinated too, and they were also victimized. And in most cases, they meant well. Like, I'm sure in most of these churches, people are good. Many of them are really good people who are literally giving their lives for a cause they believe in. But they are being they're so indoctrinated, and they're so shamed themselves. They don't even see what's happening to the person beside them. Do you know what I mean? And in my case, like, my parents didn't even have a clue what was going on with me because they hadn't raised me. And I have found that some people who were staff there have been brave enough to read the book, and they always say, I had no idea. And the truth is, that's in many cases true, because in cults, or even, I suppose, in many of these things, like, we kind of have a general idea that we're all in the same system, but we don't know what each other are actually suffering, and it wasn't safe to talk about our actual problems with each other, because that would just be brought up in light session. So, like, you don't trust, we couldn't really trust anyone. So everyone is basically trying to survive in isolation, even though we're all living in each other's pockets. It's really weird,
Yeah. No, there's a lot of nuance. I know if I come outside of my anger and try to go to my highest self, I obviously, we know that there's nuance, and that a lot of the times, like you said, these people, they're buying into it as well. I feel that way about some of the upper leadership, not upper, I think the top ones know what they're doing. But, some of the other people, I do think that there are some well-meaning people who are also very indoctrinated. When you've been in the situation for so long, you can convince yourself that you're doing a lot of good, because that's what you're being told. And you're also trying to get in line because you also don't want to be punished. And like you said, your parents, they were staffers. So in theory, they're also a part of this system, but they were being punished by having their children taken away from them. Yeah. So it's just a cycle of fear and control.
Yeah. And my dad, like I mentioned, you could have, like, as teenagers, we could be taken out of the things we wanted to be in, like sports or whatever. But even as a teacher, like my mom was taken out of teaching as a discipline. She was made to work on the kitchens and housekeeping instead. And my dad was not allowed to do music for several years because of his so-called haughtiness. I mean, just like it was constant. So I'm not trying to suggest that people should be should not take responsibility for being part of
Totally.
this system, because
Yeah.
they saw students being disciplined and publicly shamed, and they saw all kinds of stuff, but were blind to it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and so one thing that I'm happy to have heard from I actually met with two women who were responsible for one of my really difficult disciplines, which was boot camp, which I'm not going to get into here, I don't think. But anyway, I met with them about a month ago. They wanted to apologize in person, and it was hard. I was scared to meet with them, actually, because there was so much. I didn't know what, they're still both very Christian, and they actually bought me a gift, which was a Christian, like a journal,
Oh goodness.
like all this like Christian stuff in it. I'm like, oh God. But
But did they read your book?
they did. So I'm like,
Okay, well,
they didn't
maybe they
quite get
thought
it.
they might be feeling guilty. Like, did we cause this woman to not be a Christian? We should go make it right.
That's
I
what they
feel
were
like
trying to do. They actually were like, oh, we're gonna pray for you. I'm like, well, you do you. But
you do you.
but the point is, one of them said that, oh gosh, I can't remember the words she used, but she was crying, and she said, your book was not malicious. It was so loving. It was so true, but it wasn't like you were trying to out people, or it wasn't bitter. And that, I was so glad that they could apologize. And even from their perspective, which is very Christian, they found the value in the truth coming out. So yeah, that was great.
Oh,
And
wow,
yeah,
that's so
yeah.
crazy. I was going to ask you about your parents when it comes to how they had said that all human love is a sin. So, did they ever try to get in the way of married couples? Because how is it an idol for them to love you, but it's not an idol for two married people to love each other?
I've learned since over the years, I've heard all kinds of stories where they did that a lot. They basically, I've heard from a few people who were in a one specific staff meeting, or light session, I should say, where the couples there were told to not have sex anymore, and that God was calling them to not have
They're married?
sex, and they're all married. Yeah, because for the same reason, idolatry, and that God wanted and this was right from the mothers, that they were being told that he was demanding them to only be in love with God, and same thing happened down in at the Community of Jesus. One man actually wrote in a public affidavit when he left the community. He was going through a divorce, and he was basically trying to convince the courts that he should get some of his money, because I think the community was trying to keep it all. And he wrote about the fact that they weren't allowed to have a second child because they were told they had to be celibate, and they went along with it. Like these people, they listened and they obeyed. Like it's just,
Which is how you know that they were truly buying into this
yes,
stuff,
yeah,
because they were also allowing themselves to be controlled to this
yeah.
level. I wonder, do you think anybody ever stood up to them and said, what do you mean? Like we're married, or just about like any other topic, or like push back on the biblical basis of,
I don't
human
think
love
so.
is bad?
I don't know. I mean, the only way, okay, so it was really scary. If you stood up to leadership, basically that meant you weren't on board, so you had to leave. So I suppose anyone who was standing up was on their way out,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, and I probably goes without saying, I was a staff member there for 10 years, and like I wasn't allowed to marry anyone who wasn't on staff. Like you couldn't marry outside the community. So, and you also had to have permission from the leaders to court, the person who you might be getting married to. So it was funny when you were talking about your ex and how you weren't attracted to him. something similar happened with me. Like when I was 26, I was presented with this man who was my office coworker, who I was not interested in at all. He was 11 years older than me, and he was very uptight and legalistic, and I just had no interest in him at all, except for the fact that I was horrified by the idea of being a spinster for the rest of my life. So I was convinced to give it a go, and we almost got married. But
Oh my gosh.
luckily, he pulled it. At the time, it was very painful because I came to really care for him. But 8 months after we had gotten engaged, he broke it off for no reason. He couldn't come up with a reason, and luckily he did, because we would not have made a good marriage. And but it was funny. I thought I'd mention that because it reminded me, like, everything was orchestrated from above, And
Absolutely.
yeah, but
Yeah. They're like, we have found a good fit for you.
yeah,
And you're like,
exactly.
is it? Is it a good fit for me?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, before we get into your transition to being on staff, I did want to ask, growing up, because you're being raised in this community, did you even know what a cult was?
No, I'd heard the word, and it was just sort of like I had a vague understanding, but no. And in fact, like I said, when my husband, he was my fiance at the time, and I was out of the cult, he called it a cult, and I was like, no, it isn't. So it wasn't until the school closed and then all these allegations were coming out that I started researching what cults were. And when I read, Stephen Hassan's book, every single thing on the checklist, like every item was like, check, 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 check. Oh, he's been to our place, has he? Like, it was so crystal clear. And yeah, but I had no idea.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
So when you ended up graduating, well, okay. So at 16, you were expelled. They took you to that place for a bit so that you could become really, really indoctrinated. And that way you wouldn't want to sin again, I guess, like in their mind. So then did you come back and graduate after that?
Yes, so I came back when I was almost 18, and I then so I graduated from Grenville, and we staff kids were told that it was God's will for us to live at Grenville or the Community of Jesus for life. And it would be up to God to tell us which place to live. And I was always afraid that I would have to become one of the brothers or sisters. Those were the nuns or monks. They have a whole convent and monastery down at Cape Cod. And my second brother, became a monk when he was 21. So basically they were told that God's calling you to be a this or that. And so I was so afraid that would be my call. But yeah, I didn't question the notion that I was meant to live there for life. And then I took vows of obedience in the public ceremony in Cape Cod when I was 21. We were given gold cross rings to wear. We had to buy them, but yeah, we had to wear these cross rings and commit to obedience to the mothers for life. So then I just became a staff member at Grenville and worked my butt off for 10 years. Basically, one of the things I often hear your guests talk about is the way we worked like slaves, like slave labor, like
Yes.
it's so prevalent. I mean, we hardly made any money and we weren't in it for the money, but we worked so hard. And Grenville went bankrupt eventually because some of the staff started moving away like I did, and they couldn't afford to keep going because they'd have to hire people from the outside who would cost 3 times or 4 times the amount to pay, because
Yeah,
we
it's
were
much
all,
easier to try to keep people who are told that you have to stay for life. This is your calling. And since you've been so indoctrinated from such a young age, you're likely not to ask for more money.
Exactly. I'll never forget that it took me 3 years to get, so like fast forward through, my 20s, life got harder and harder. The disciplines got worse and worse. And by the time I was about 28, I couldn't stand, like, I just was so unhappy, and I was also single, and I just started to, like, realize I don't think I can do this anymore. And
Were your parents still there?
yes, yeah, they were there till the end.
Till it closed, yeah.
So I got I'd heard of a couple people had asked for a year off, and I was like, maybe I should ask for a year off, like the Amish do, like to go
Yeah.
out into the world and see if you can handle it. But I was too scared. And so I was like, okay, what would be something like that? And I realized, okay, well, maybe I could ask to move off campus and still work here, because then I'd still have a job. And I got up so I decided, it took me forever to get the courage, but I asked for triple my salary and the chance to leave and go live off campus. And I had a specialized job in the finance department, and they said yes. It took them a few weeks, but they got back to me. So that was the beginning of my end, because it took me, even then, I lived in the nearby town and came into work every day. It took me still 3 more years to actually decide, okay, I'm leaving and cut all ties. Yeah, because that's how indoctrinated I was. But yeah, yeah.
Once you moved off campus, did you start to meet people
Yeah.
outside of the cult? And
Yeah,
how did that come about?
yeah, so actually, before I even asked to move off campus, I'd gone through knee surgery, and I had been told by the doctor that I needed rehab, what's that called? Physio. And also then they told me I should try to do aquafit. So I started going to the Y and meeting like regular people. and I loved it so much. I was getting fitter and stronger, and I just felt like I started to feel like a caged animal. And so my first big ask was, I was worried that I wouldn't get to keep going to the Y once I was fit. So I asked them if I could get trained as a fitness instructor. And I said, if I get the certification, I'll teach fitness classes at the school. But I also said, but I also will be trained by the YMCA, so I'll also have to teach for them. So that way I could be in both worlds. Because they had never let me be a teacher at Grenfell. They said I'd be too haughty and too egotistical as a teacher.
Oh my gosh.
So I actually became a teacher once I left, but I went to university and got my degree. But so I met people at the Y, and that's how I started getting like more and more confident outside of campus. And I started to feel like a caged animal, like I said, and I started to question my happiness and I also started questioning what was going on at the school, and the kinds of things that I couldn't stand anymore were the light sessions, where they were constantly nitpicking about sins that at that point I started to realize they were making up. And instead of feeling shame in these light sessions, I started feeling anger. And I started being like, what the actual F are you talking about? So like I did feel like I was a failure, but I also could see that in some ways they were full of shit, and I didn't want any part of that. And so the cognitive dissonance and the what's it called when you start to think critically? Yeah, that started in that time, and that was just as I was getting close to age of 30. And just meeting a few people on the outside at the Y and other places.
That'll do it. I feel like when I moved to Atlanta and I started working with other background actors and I was finally outside of the Bethel bubble, I mean, it becomes a lot easier to think critically once you see that there are other people who seemingly are happy, and you're kind of told everybody on the outside is so unhappy and they're so unfulfilled. Yeah. It's like, I don't know. I feel pretty unhappy.
I know. That's exactly it. Like I met, I get into it. I also met this guy called Cowboy Bob, and it's a whole story. But he was, you know, I would say he never would go to church. Like he swore up and down, like he was swearing all the time, and you know, made my ears curl, or my hair curl, and my ears hurt. I used to tell him, but he, you know, I could see that he was such a good person, and he had more morals than these lying people who were telling me that I was sinful for this, that, and the other thing that I knew they were making up. And I started to realize, you know, here's a guy who never goes to church that I could trust more, you know? And at one point he said, lady, you don't owe that place one fucking thing. And I was like, it was hard for me to believe it, but I started to hear it and listen to what he was saying. And yeah, it took a long time, but I finally got the courage. So.
Yeah. So what was that conversation like when you finally decided to leave? Because I mean, in their mind and in your mind previously, you had sworn your entire life away to this place. So how did that conversation go?
Well, it was a series of them. And you know, I basically took the easy road out and used email to tell the community of Jesus I was breaking my vows. And I also, because I'd done it gradually, they could see that I was like moving away. I was living off campus. So I was basically living kind of like, I felt like the Scarlet Letter. I'd come into work and, you know, from the evil outside and work there for the day and then go back to my evil life. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So I did that gradually. But I think I basically gave them 6 months notice once I got into university for a teaching degree, and helped them train someone to do my job. But for me, because I didn't realize it was a cult, it was really important for me to do it to leave in a way that I wouldn't be shunned, because I'd seen everyone else shunned, and I wanted to leave in a way that I could still be welcomed back anytime, because I was really scared to leave. And when I left, yes, I felt like I was leaving behind everyone I knew, but I still felt like they weren't angry at me in a way, because I'd left so carefully. Do you know what I mean? And so
it's like you left in the most considerate possible way that you could have.
Exactly. And I was really keen to go back and visit whenever I could. And I actually got married there eventually, a few years later, which was a mistake, because I should not have done that. But they were my only people, right? Yeah. So I felt so alone out in the outside world, even though I was happier, and it was still really hard to be on my own. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, you say that when did you finally start to realize that it was a cult? When these stories started coming out? Because I know you said you had heard, what's it called? Your husband's friend say that place is a cult, and you still didn't believe it. But what was the tipping point to where you finally started to go, oh my gosh, that's what that was?
So the summer that Grenville closed, they closed due to bankruptcy, and it was a shock. No one saw it coming. Well, I knew they were struggling, but I was shocked. My mother called me and I was just like, what? So, you know, all 100 staff are still living on campus with no place to live.
Were the sisters still alive?
By that time, they had both died, and there was a new mother in charge at the Cape. But so, you know, all these staff had to decide, are they going to move to the Cape, or are they going to just go off on their own? What are they going to do? Are they going to start a new community? Whatever. But that wasn't my concern. And so I was trying to decide, you know, well, not decide. I was just trying to think, what do I think about all this? And I heard about that website called FactNet, where cult survivors can post anonymously. And there was a whole section about our cult, and just hundreds and hundreds of posts. So we all went deep dive into this rabbit hole, reading these posts where people were telling their stories of abuse, and my eyes were opened like crazy right then and there. And within a few months, I joined a group who were like a steering committee, and we launched the lawsuit just months later. And that's all it took for me to realize it was a cult. And not only that, it was extremely damaging, and I wanted to do something about it. Because the school, right from that time, started coming out and denying all the allegations of abuse. So that actually,
Yeah.
that was my catalyst. They came out, the final headmaster was quoted in our national newspaper saying that there was no truth to the allegations. And that's all I needed, because by then I was like, I knew he was lying, and I knew he knew he was lying.
Yeah.
And I didn't have a clue how hard the lawsuit would be, or that it would take almost 17 years to conclude. But I knew it would be part of my healing. That's all I knew. My intuition was like, Beth, this is going to be your healing, so you better get on board. And I'm really glad I did.
Yeah. So when did the lawsuit start and when did it end?
Yeah, so they went bankrupt in the summer of 2007. The lawsuit was launched in the courts in January 2008. So it was like less than 6 months later. And 2024 was when it concluded. Like, we reached the final stage of the reparations, or what would you say, the settlement, I guess. But we didn't settle in the traditional sense. We did go to trial, and we won, and then we also won the appeal 2 years later with 3 other judges. And then the next stage was to work out like payments, and that part we ended up settling with the insurance companies. But yeah, it was a long.
Well, it was a historic win,
Yeah,
right? You said?
yeah. First historic abuse case to go to trial and win. So, yeah, we had one of our lawyers is now a judge, but he was one of the lawyers to win the first Indigenous case against the Canadian government, because you know how all the Indigenous kids were rounded up and put into boarding schools for the last maybe 100 years, and they were just horribly abused. And it was basically cultural genocide. He was one of the first lawyers to start on that case, and I think he represented, if I'm not mistaken, 80,000 victims in his in his case. So yeah, it was just horrible. But yeah, so all of that. It was really difficult to go through, but it was a huge part of my healing, because I only had an inkling when I started the lawsuit that I was harmed and that others were harmed. And it took those 17 or 18 years. I don't know. I lose track of what that is. It's 16 years,
16,
basically.
yeah.
16 plus the next year we had to go through the whole claims process. So that's just wrapping up now. So yeah, it took all that time to chip away at all the layers of trauma, because when we leave these systems, it seems to me that many of us dissociated so much through the process of trying to survive that you can't really understand what you've gone through, and you try to outrun your trauma, and I totally did that. Even though I was facing it in the case of the lawsuit. I mean, I was working full time as a mom, a teacher. I could barely deal with the requirements of the lawsuit, and I did not have time to deal with my trauma. And it actually caught up with me in 2019 when we got to trial, and my life fell apart. Because I, like a lot of us, I just raced to try to outrun it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And in my case, I was prescribed benzodiazepine for my anxiety, which I was on Ativan, 3 Ativan a day, and that is very dangerous to be on that much for 10 years. And I had to go off of it in 2019, and just the withdrawal was brutal.
Yeah.
So I needed years to go through the withdrawal, and then also the trauma that came bubbling up from out of nowhere. Do you know what I mean? Because I'd
Yeah,
never
that had
really
been
felt
kind
like
of
it.
hiding away.
Yeah.
And then I'm sure when you're going through this lawsuit, did you have to testify?
Yes, I was on the stand for 3 days.
Yeah.
It
So, I
was
mean, that's
so
no
triggering.
little thing.
It was so triggering, and it felt like I had no idea. Not only then, like I'd also been through depositions several times over the years, but the trial was another beast altogether, and I was just broken. Like they try to break you on
Yeah.
the stand, and it was just like being in a light session. And I mean, the good news was I kept telling myself these people are professional, and they can't hurt me as much as the cult hurt me. But it still was so hard. I mean, I wanted to quit desperately. So yeah. Anyway, I mean, it's all. I can't get into all of what recovery was. I just I wrote the book for people who to understand that you don't just leave these places and then hooray, life starts anew and you're all good to go. You have so much harm that's deep in your body, deep in your mind, and you have the voices of the the abuser's voices trapped inside your head yelling at you. It takes so much time and patience and compassion to heal. And that I it's all in the story of taking the 20 plus years of healing since I left.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Have you found a lot of healing through writing the
Oh
memoir?
yes, that was another thing
Like,
that
what even
completely.
made you want to do it in the first place to decide, okay, I'm finally going to sit down and
Yeah.
write this all down?
Well, it's funny because like I said, I went through benzo withdrawal, and part of that, like I couldn't even think. Like my a lot of people who go through withdrawal of benzos have a kind of brain injury. It's called BIND, benzo-induced neurological dysfunction, I think it is, and that's what I got. And so I couldn't even read. I couldn't handle screens. I could barely watch TV, and I couldn't drive. So I was very disabled, and I was looking at going into court that way. And I was going to be grilled. And the other thing is, when you're on the stand, what they try to do, the defense tries to get you to make mistakes by saying something that disagrees with the 4 other depositions you've had in the last 8 or 10 years. So if you make any discrepancy, they're going to eat you alive. So I was so scared that I would say something, because one of the problems, the reasons I had to go off benzos was I couldn't my memory was shot. So anyway, I was terrified. So in order to prepare for the trial, I started writing in a dollar store journal. That's all I could handle, and I started allowing myself to remember my past. And I had already been getting a lot of therapy for maybe well over a decade, but I'd never had the chance to actually remember the stuff that was trapped in my head. Because I think anyone who's gone through a difficult trauma in their childhood, they don't want to think about it. So I didn't remember this stuff. And that exercise of writing in that journal was so transformative. It was so painful and the tears were flowing, but it showed me, just even in 20-minute increments, how powerful the writing was. And I would bring this journal to my therapist, and she would just be gobsmacked with the kinds of things I was telling her. These are things I had totally forgotten about. So it just showed me how powerful writing was. So then I started thinking, maybe I should keep writing. So after a couple of years of more healing, just healing my brain, I started to be able to use the computer, and I started getting Facebook ads. You know how Facebook reads your mind?
Yes.
I had these Facebook ads for a memoir writing course. A Canadian was giving
Ooh.
this course, and I was like, maybe I should do that. So I took the course, and I loved it because it was just giving these little tasks in bite-sized chunks. And anytime I did a task, you could, if you wanted, you could share what you'd written with the other people in the course. And a few times I shared, and people were like, oh my God, what happens next? Like, you've got to write your story. So that was enough to kind of give me motivation. And I realized, you know what, I think this is what I need to do for my healing, because I could just tell how healing it was, just even the bits that I was doing. And it became my, like, I had to give up my teaching career because of everything fell apart and I needed disability, but this became my new focus and my new purpose. And it was a hugely healing exercise. I mean, I would write almost every day and cry and then go have a nap all afternoon and then start again the next day. And it was just incredibly transformative, because that was the way I processed, for the first time I processed the trauma. And every time I wrote a scene or a memory and I cried about it, it didn't have the same charge as it did before,
Yeah.
So that has, and then just getting the courage to talk about it was also another huge step, because once the book published, then I had to realize, oh my God, if I want people to buy this, I've got to talk about it. And that scared me. My first podcast, I was shaking like a leaf.
You've been on quite a few.
I have, but I was so scared. I mean, yeah, so I couldn't sleep for days because, before the first podcast, my brain wanted me to not talk about it. My brain was like, Beth, all you have to say is that you had a tough childhood, but you can't remember why.
Read the book. No.
But I had to really face that fear. And I've done a lot of in-person events, so many library events. People have so many questions, but it has been so healing to find the voice and find the ability to tell these truths and these stories. So yeah, I recommend writing.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'm working on writing a book right
good.
now. So we'll see. We'll see what
I
I finally finish it.
Your story is so compelling. I'm glad you're writing.
Thank you. I was wondering, what has the reaction been like? Obviously, we know that those ladies tried to give you a journal and all of that, but have you had any reactions from your parents? Have there been any conversations about that?
Yeah, so I'm lucky. My parents have been very supportive, and they actually, in the book, my dad allowed me to publish one of his confession letters, which was very eye-opening, and tell a little bit of one of his stories. And they've been they've been trying to help me promote the book, and it's just been wonderful in that way. And then the whole time I wrote it, it was excruciating to write, I'll be honest. Like I say, it was very healing, but it was also really difficult. But I was very motivated because I knew it wasn't just my story. And I've heard so many survivors of our cult come forward to talk to me and to thank me for how much the book has helped them heal, but also it's helped their loved ones understand them better. And I love that. That's been a nice surprise for me. And then I'm also hearing from lots of people who, like your listeners or like your other guests, are from just mainstream Christianity. There are so many correlations, the kinds of ways religion is weaponized, that's so harmful to people. I had one guy come up to me at a book event. He was younger than me. Well, at least maybe 10, 15 years younger than me, and said he and his wife just left their church because they read my book, because their church was toxic. And I was like, wow,
That's amazing.
I keep hearing from people that it's making an impact, and I'm so amazed and grateful that it is. So I'm just, every time I get to talk about it, it scares me, but I'm also so happy to have the chance to maybe find the readers that it needs to get to, because yeah,
absolutely. I think that's probably the biggest thing that I've learned, like going back to what you were saying on hearing the guests in just normal quote unquote normal Christianity, and there's so many correlations. I just had a conversation with somebody, her episode's going to be coming out, and she was raised Mormon, and just to hear, like, it's so different. Our doctrine, our beliefs, it's incredibly different, but there's so many parallels to just what you experience in any of these denominations or cults, and the umbrella of high control religion, we have so much more in common than we do differences, even though the specifics are different.
Yeah, it really is. It's incredible. I remember even well before I understood or could even remember much of my own trauma, I was reading memoirs, and I remember some of the ones that, the FLDS survivors of the really extreme Mormons. I couldn't believe how, like, I'd be shaking reading their books, and their lives were so much different, so much worse, I thought, than mine. But in so many ways, they mirrored it. So. And even, it's so funny, like even Nexium, which wasn't religious at all, they had so many of the same kinds of coercive tactics that were used. So
there's so many similarities. It feels like, it's all by the same playbook. People know how to control a group, and that's why I love what you're doing, with your memoir, because I think for me, when I was living in Atlanta, I think one of the biggest things that helped me finally escape from being with Ted was reading. I went through a period where I read, or I'm an audiobook person, so I listened to over 100 books a year. I was really into it, and listening to memoirs was something that really opened my eyes, because I would see similarities, or I would hear these stories of people leaving abuse, and I'm sitting here going to bed with this man and being like, wow, they made such a life for themselves. That's wonderful. I wish I could have that. And it took me a long time to finally make that leap. But I think that there's just so much power in telling our stories, because like you said, even the people who came up to you, they weren't involved in a cult, but they realized that their church was toxic by reading your book. Memoirs have been so powerful for me as well. And I love that you love audio, because I told my publisher, I said, I have to have the audio, like we have to do audio. So I narrated it in the studio and made sure that happened, because I always listen to books in audio form as well. Same. It's the only way to get the books in when you're doing the dishes or I know, I'm like, when else would I find the time? Exactly. I'm able to listen while I fold my laundry. And okay, side note, I'm wondering, did your voice get tired? Because I would feel like I would get tired reading my book.
I was really scared of doing it, because like I was still going through, the after effects of withdrawal, and I need naps every day. And the studio was an hour away, so I had to, and it was expensive. So I was like, I don't know if I can do, So I could only do it for about 2 up to 3 hours, and with a break in the middle, because it was so intense. The first time I did a session, I was shaking like a leaf for 5 hours afterwards, because it's so emotional doing this and reading it, and like you have to inhabit the story again. But my voice would get tired, but like I said, I could only handle a couple hours.
Do it in chunks.
Yeah. So, but to me, it was so worth it. And people have said they've really appreciated the audiobook. So I'm glad I did it.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, where can people find your book?
Yeah, it's anywhere books are sold. If you're in the States, Barnes and Noble, Amazon, because I'm not going to, you'd have to, or you can ask at your bookstore, they can order it in. But my website's www.bethgranger.ca. And there are links to the books there. And then from there, you can find me on socials and stuff. But so
where can people find you on social media? I'll make sure to link all of it. But if you just want to tell people where to find you.
On Facebook, it's Beth Granger, or Beth Granger author. I'm there twice. And so on Instagram, I'm at Happy Granger. So
awesome.
Happy that I got out.
I'll make sure to link everything in the show notes so that people can find you. But thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story.
Thank you for having me. It's been a thrill. And I really love your podcast. I've been addicted to it.
Oh, thank you so much.
So,
Oh my gosh. Well, if you guys could please leave a review for Healdish, that would mean the world to me. It really helps the show grow. And I don't know, just seeing the positive feedback to the podcast. I just want to say thank you to you guys because I get emotional about it all the time. The fact that it's done pretty well for, the first year. And I feel like with every episode, I get a level of healing as well. I mean, just talking to people who we live such different lives, but similar in a lot of ways. So thank you again so much, Beth, for coming on. And I will see you guys next week for another episode of Healdish.